Breaking news, my Queen in Siberia mug has finally arrived. Hope you can see it, there you go, the light's shining on it a bit. I love that design, looks really smart. And you can get all the PowerPlay merch, including this mug, from our online store at Teespring. You'll find the link in the video description. So buy some merch and support the channel. Well, I'd love to report that there was a queen in Siberia on the board today. But no, both queens in this game were in the thick of the action. And this was so complicated, such an interesting game. Tari, 21 years old, from Norway, against Alireza Firouzja, resident in France, 17-year-old. It's quite funny. Tari must be thinking, wow, I feel like an old man at 21. Facing Firouzja. Well, Tari with white has to play against Firouzja's favourite opening against e4, the Caro-Kann. If he wanted to keep the game in sort of quieter channels, he could play knight c3 or maybe exchange on d5. But instead, Tari was obviously spoiling for a fight, and he played, well, perhaps the most complex variation, the advanced variation. When the position is closed, then a lot of tension can build up and then it suddenly explodes. And that's what happened here. Tari plays the so-called short variation, named after Nigel Short, who popularised this idea. So we've got a closed position. Centre is locked together, just like in a French defence, except this bishop is outside the pawn chain instead of being on c8. And there are pros and cons to this. Sometimes the bishop can even be a target. But it also means that because black has developed quickly, then you can castle on the queen side more often. So there are pros and cons to this. Interestingly, Firouzja has experience on both sides of the board, actually. He's also played this with white. So white gets castled. That's good. And now knight e1. So with knight e1, it could be that white prepares a pawn storm with g4 and f4 and, if possible, f5. So you can see that this bishop can turn into a target. So h5 from Firouzja. Well, I think he'd be very glad if that were taken, opening up the h-file. So bishop e3 from Tari. And Firouzja with white has had to face h4 himself, but, well, he didn't go with that one. He went with queen b6, attacking the pawn on b2. So Tari defends against that. And of course that means that black has the option to castle queenside now if he wants it. f6 played by Firouzja. He was already thinking a fair bit here. He'd spent 8 minutes over this move. I have a feeling it might have been preparation anyway, but it's already a very complex position with black trying to break down white's centre. Of course, you know, if white gives up that strong point on e5, that can give black a tremendous centre. Potentially later on you can push with e5. Watch out for the queen, I know. But, you know, if you get your king to this side of the board, and of course there's an open g-file as well. So it's quite important that, well, white finds something now. Of course, the move you would like to make is f4 to support that pawn. But there is a tactical problem, of course. Watch out for the queen on this diagonal. Black can take and take on e5. Typical trick for these kind of positions. If pawn takes knight, then queen takes bishop. So at this point, after f6, white has to mix it because there's no really good way to support the pawn on e5. And Tari boldly takes that pawn on h5. Now, of course, that's incredibly risky because the h-file opens. The bishop, of course, is protected by the queen, but still it feels a little bit wobbly, particularly after black takes on e5. So white's centre is disappearing. Both players consuming big chunks of time around here. 20 minutes taken on f takes e5. And if pawn takes pawn, then, well, simply the queen will drop back and castles queenside, and then black gets on with attacking on the kingside, basically. That looks like a lot of fun with that semi-open h-file. So Tari decided to play g4. Wow, so this is really raising the stakes. And, well, Firouzja played what, to my eyes, looks like a very natural exchange sacrifice. Just rook takes bishop. And then knight f4. You know, after g4, it's such a risky move. Once that g-pawn is gone, then, you know, there are holes all around white's king. The g-file is also open. Black still has this wonderful clump of centre pawns, strong centre, so it's very hard for white to counterattack through the middle. Also, white's development is very poor here. I mean, this to me looks like an absolute dream exchange sacrifice. I mean, I would hardly call it a sacrifice because, well, black has so many pieces in play. It's a very small material investment. Looks to me at this stage as though white is in massive trouble. Check and king g2. Here, bishop c5 is interesting. Just to clear the bishop out of the way and get castled, and that will mean the queen's rook can easily enter the game on the king side. But Firouzja played c5. Well, also very tempting because it will allow the queen to sidestep to c6, looking down this diagonal. And of course, these two central pawns control a lot of very nice squares. f4 by Tari. I think he has to do that to support the pawn on e5. If that one disappears, then white's position really does collapse. Queen c6. There we go. The queen hits the long diagonal. It looks really dangerous. Knight f3. Well, got to get a piece off the back rank. And castles queenside. Still looks fantastic for black, to my eyes. Knight d2. Finally, on move 18, that knight comes into the game. Knight b6. Looks very logical. d4 is being prepared, and then the knight can follow up into the middle. Here, in fact, my computer thinks that white is still all right in this position. I can imagine Tari would have been feeling very anxious at this moment. The computer's recommendation is king g3. Step out of the diagonal. Even so, I mean, black still has a tremendous initiative. I would say I would take black any day in that position. Although, as I said, the computer thinks that white is actually better. But, well, there you go. Human eyes, computer eyes. Queen e1. Played instead. Bishop e7. Simple stuff. The bishop develops, controls these squares. Possibly the rook can come over to the king side at some moment. Rook c1. Okay, so white is hoping to dissuade black from playing d4 because of, well, the potential of the c-file opening. But no, it didn't dissuade Firouzja at all. d4 played. So pawn takes pawn and knight d5. So things are really heating up for white's king. The queen on the long diagonal. This pawn is attacked by both knights. I mean, all black's pieces are in play. It's a beautiful position. The computer recommendation here is king h1 to step away from this check, but, well, I still think black has pretty good play there. There's a very nice move. Pawn takes pawn doesn't look logical at all, and in fact it's a blunder. There's a beautiful winning move here, and that's bishop h4. Lovely move. If knight takes bishop, then there's going to be a huge double check on the long diagonal. And if queen takes bishop, then knight takes bishop check. Looks pretty good. Well, let's just see that actually. Knight takes bishop check. And rook takes d2, exploiting the pin on the long diagonal. Looks really nice. In any case, I mean, pawn takes pawn doesn't look logical, but I just wanted to show that tactic anyway. So that's the position. Knight d5 has just been played. Knight c4 played by Tari. Knight takes pawn check. Bishop takes, knight takes, and the king goes back to g1. Fair enough. And here bishop g4 is played. Rook takes d4 is also pretty good, but bishop g4 also a good move. This is the game continuation. Attacking the knight. And take care. If that knight moves too far away, there's queen g2 mate. So rook c3, it already feels very artificial to have to defend that knight with the rook. Rook takes d4. Wow. Looking absolutely wonderful for Firouzja. Of course, knight takes rook, queen g2 mate. All black's pieces in play, two bishops. The knight beautifully plays the queen. I mean, everything looks good for black here. Knight d6. In fact, white has hidden resources. Knight d6 check, played. King b8. In fact, king d7 is possibly a better move. But anyway, king b8 played. Queen e3. And here, well, it's still fantastically complicated because white does have some pressure on the c-file. This knight is actually very annoying. And the best move apparently is bishop takes h5. Well, fine. It's an absolutely mad position. Firouzja played bishop takes bishop g5, which is obviously very, very dangerous. Knight, for example, knight h3 check is threatened, winning the queen. And here, Tari cracked. Well, let's just have a think for a moment. How would you play here if you had the white pieces? The move that my computer recommends is so bonkers. I mean, really. I'm not saying that Tari should find this move. Absolutely not. It looks so illogical to me. The move... Well, so just a quick recap. Rook takes c5 was played in the game. The computer recommends king h1, which looks absolutely crazy to step into this pin. That's why I think it's just so illogical. But there's method to this machine's madness. Why does it want to play king h1? Well, one thing, it steps away from this check, so that doesn't win. Also, now queen takes rook is threatened because there's no knight e2 check. So that's the threat. So let's say queen d5 looks nice to centralize. And I would think, I mean, from first glance, this still looks absolutely fantastic for black. In fact, there is a sensational resource for white here, which actually wins the game. First of all, let's just have a quick look at rook takes pawn. Mistake. Not because of queen takes rook, because then knight takes rook, and white is fine. But here, black can take and actually win, because the back rank is weak, and mate next move. But there is a resource after this move, queen d5. h4. This is a winning move. This is incredible. Threatening pawn takes bishop, and if the bishop drops back, then you can take on c5 truly extraordinary, because in this case, well, after the exchange of queens, the king will have an escape square on h2, and then white is an exchange up with a winning position. So that's why h4 was flicked in. And if queen takes rook, then queen b7 is mate. I mean, these tactics are, well, when you're short of time, unseeable, of course. But what a fantastic move. h4 here, and then this. And yes, if queen takes rook, then knight takes d4. And this is actually very good for white, because if there's a check here, then the queen can step in the way. White is the exchange up and should be winning that position. Incredibly beautiful knight on d6 suddenly. So let's go back to the game continuation. A quick reminder. Bishop g5 has just been played by Firouzja. King h1, a ludicrous move, is actually the best move, and actually should give white a winning position. But instead, rook takes c5 from Tari. Queen takes rook. Knight takes bishop. Which doesn't look bad to simplify. And here, black is winning. Okay, can you find the winning move for black? Firouzja, running dangerously short of time, failed to see this move. I'm not surprised. It's another move which is very, very difficult to see. This position is about pure tactics. You know, when the pawn structure basically just explodes and there are no sort of anchors for the pieces, then it's just pure tactics. So how does black win from this position? I'll have a slow petit from my beautiful new mug. You have a little think. The winning move is bishop e2. Well, what's that got to do with anything? Well, what happens? Of course, the rook threatened. Well, what about rook takes knight? Well, in this case, black wins with a check. That uncovers this threat. And then we can deflect the king away. And you even take the rook on the next turn. Check. Incredible stuff. And if the rook, for example, moves to e1, well, there's a couple of winning moves, but rook to e1 is the most elegant. Again, uncovering this, and if queen takes queen, rook e1 check, and knight d3. Forking king and queen. Absolutely stunning. But bishop e2, not an obvious move at all. Instead, Firouzja played knight e2 check. And after king g2, Tari offered a draw. And Firouzja, well, he didn't have much time. He was, I mean, from memory, it was maybe a minute and a half, something like that. Well, his time ticked down and he decided to take the draw. Well, I have to say, it was a real anticlimax because, you know, watching this game from the Tata Steel live feed, you know, it was just absolutely thrilling, an amazing game. And suddenly the whole thing just ends in a draw, frankly, prematurely. I was amazed when it happened because most tournaments, top tournaments these days, forbid draw offers either, you know, before move 40, something like that, or some just don't allow draw offers at all, or, you know, only in special circumstances you go to the arbiter when it's a clearly drawn position, or obviously threefold repetition. So I was amazed when that happens, and, well, I think Tari was basically, you know, he said afterwards that he was relieved to sort of get to this position and realised, you know, he wasn't losing immediately and just kind of offered a draw, put more pressure on Firouzja, who took it. I'm not surprised that Firouzja took it because I think it's more difficult for black to play than white now. With best play, it should be a draw. I mean, I don't want to go into variations, frankly, because it's still complicated. I'm just a bit disappointed. It was a tremendous game up till this moment, but maybe the organisers of Tata Steel can think again about the draw offer rule for next year. Anyway, there we go. In fact, all the games in round 4 were drawn today. I mean, there were very good struggles. So there is a pile up of players on 2.5 out of 4. So the field is bunching. Let's see who can make break and take the lead. Thanks for watching.